Well, let's get more on this. We have Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg joining us with more. Sumitra, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Sumitra, what has been the reaction in Pretoria to the U.S. tariffs?
Well, the presidency issued a statement this morning, noted the events with concern. It seems, no one is being spared in this Trump tirade. There's about 180 countries affected. South African goods will be hit with a tariff of 31%. It's big. It will have a significant impact. The presidency, while expressing worry, is still very measured in its response, saying that while South Africa remains committed to a mutually beneficial trade relationship with the United States, unilaterally imposed and punitive tariffs are a concern and serve as a barrier to trade and shared prosperity. Now, among the African countries hardest hit by Trump's drive to introduce what he says are reciprocal tariffs are the southern African states of Lesotho, whose goods will be hit with a tariff of 50%. Madagascar as well, Mauritius, Botswana, Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi as well.
Well, Sumitra, what trade plan does the government have in response going forward? What would you say that would be?
Well, the president already sent a delegation to the U.S. To clarify South African policies. If you remember, we are still dealing with President Trump cancelling all aid to South Africa, saying that terrible things are happening here, that land was being taken away from white people, which of course is not the case. So South Africa has been dealing with this, trying to sort that situation out, explain the expropriation policies that we have in place, but again, was pushed back after our South African ambassador was expelled from the U.S. It's been a series of misfortunes and setbacks for the country, but the presidency still showing restraint, saying this morning that this could be an opportunity to renegotiate bilateral agreements with the U.S. The timing couldn't be worse. South Africa is also in the midst of its own problems here at home. The national budget was passed in Parliament last night after weeks of wrangling between the political parties, which has now placed the government of national unity in jeopardy. We've already seen the impact on the markets reacting to that, the rand losing over 30% as investors really worried on the way forward. The U.S. tariffs just adds to the situation, raising concerns on the impact this will have on an already sluggish economy.
Sumitra, you touched on Lesotho earlier in your initial statement. Lesotho has been hit the hardest with 50%. What are you hearing from the kingdom?
Well, South Africa was hard hit, but there's a bunch of countries that were hit harder. Like you say, Lesotho, by far the worst affected on the continent. It was hit with a 50% tariff hike on all goods exported to the U.S. So the U.S. calculated the difference of import and export trade with each country in order to determine the tariff percentage. So you can imagine that the size of the trade deficit with Lesotho. Lesotho, of course, is buying very little from the U.S. But Lesotho is a tiny country. It is known as a tiny kingdom. It's a really small economy, and it depends heavily on manufacturing goods, mostly for the U.S. market, clothing being one of the biggest areas. It benefits under AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, as well. Now, with this tariff hike, thousands of jobs are at risk. This economy is at risk. The government of Lesotho has yet to make any announcements there. We're waiting for that. And as I said, North Africa also among the regions hit. Libya will be charged 31%, Algeria, 30%, and Tunisia 28%. West Africa also being hit by this. But Lesotho, for such a tiny country, 50% is massive. And the consequences will surely be felt there.
All right, Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg, thanks for that. We are now joined by James Shikwati, founder, Inter-Region Economic Network, joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Mr. Shikwati, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live as well. What do you make of Trump's tariffs policies, especially to Africa? What's your take?
Yeah, I would say the Trump's tariff really epitomized the statement in Africa that when elephants fight, the grass suffer. So in this case, we'll notice that his main focus, of course, is the bigger economies such as China and European Union, but Africa indirectly then suffers from this, as we've seen from the previous explanation, the tariffs on South Africa, and then, of course, even Kenya, which exports coffee to the United States. So I think there's this reordering of the international trading system that America has just now announced. And I think for Africa, it's to look at it in terms of which opportunities we can get out of the reordering or the disruption, because we should recall Africa participates in the international trading system only 3%. So this disruption should offer Africa an opportunity to check for possibilities of how they can, gain in terms of the new order that is likely to come out of this.
All right, Mr. Shikwati, let's unpack that a little more. What is your basic understanding of these tariffs, and what would you say will be the impact on Africa?
Well, first of all is that America has been offering Africa opportunities through what they call AGOA. And now with these tariffs coming without clearly stating whether the AGOA system will remain in place, it means many of the African countries, including Kenya, that were eligible to export products to the US will have the 10% basic tariff that has been outlined, meaning coffee to the US will now not be as smooth as it has been before. So that will mean that production within Kenya, jobs will be lost in the short run.
Right, you mentioned job loss and how that will affect Africa's economy, but what would you say Trump is trying to achieve with all these tariffs as far as Africa is concerned?
I think if we read Trump's previous books, The Art of Deal Making, I think he's just in the game of trying to create an opportunity to make a deal. I think he wants countries to rush to the US to negotiate for better terms. And I think the overall goal, he's looking at the emerging markets that are threatening the dominance of the United States. And therefore, he's creating an opportunity for deal making so that he can either talk countries such as those in Africa out of engaging with others such as China so that they can go back in a big way to engage with the United States of America.